She stood in front of millions of viewers
Hi
every
there.
single morning, composed,
I'm
unshakable,
coming on
the
to
kind of
say
presence that
it
made you
is
feel like
day
no matter what was
24
happening in the world.
since our mom
Someone steady was
was
watching over it.
taken
And
in
for
the
a
dark
long
of
time,
night
that is
from her
exactly
bed.
what the world believed about her. But behind that polished smile, behind those confident eyes that had stared down presidents and pressed through the noise of some of the biggest news stories of a generation, Savannah Guthrie was carrying something that had nothing to do with headlines. Nothing to do with ratings, nothing to do with the cold blue glow of studio lights at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. It had to do with a name, Nancy Guthrie. A woman connected to Savannah in a way that most of her viewers never knew. A connection that had quietly existed beneath the surface of one of the most recognizable careers in American television. Hidden not out of shame, but out of something more complicated than that, something more personal. And when Savannah finally decided she needed answers, the story that began to unfold was not what anyone expected. $100,000. Think about that number for a moment. It is not a casual figure. It does not come from a passing curiosity or a slow afternoon of wondering. That kind of number comes from somewhere deep. From a place that logic cannot fully explain and that professional success cannot silence. It represented the weight of a search, the stubborn refusal to accept an incomplete picture. The kind of determination that only rises in a person when something truly matters to them on a level that goes far beyond reason. Who is Nancy Guthrie? Why would a woman at the very peak of her career, beloved by millions, one of the most trusted faces in American journalism, why would she attach that kind of reward to a single name? And what does that search tell us about the woman the world thought it already knew completely? Stay with this story, because what unfolds here is not really about television or fame or the machinery of morning news. It is about something far older and far more human than any of that. It is about identity, about the questions we carry in silence for years, about the pieces of ourselves that success cannot fill and recognition cannot replace, and about the lengths a person will go to when they finally decide they need to understand where they truly came from. This is the story of Savannah Guthrie, and the search that quietly changed everything. Most people encounter Savannah Guthrie the same way, through a screen over coffee in the half-awake haze of a morning that has not fully started yet. She is there, reliable, sharp, warm in a way that does not feel performed. The kind of journalist who makes difficult conversations look effortless and makes effortless conversations feel meaningful. She built her career on a single principle: that the truth was always worth pursuing, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how many layers you had to peel back to reach it. So it should perhaps surprise no one that when a deeply personal mystery entered her own life, she approached it with the exact same energy she brought to every story she ever covered. But what makes this particular chapter of her life so genuinely fascinating is not just the search itself. It is what the search reveals about her. The questions about family and belonging and identity that even the most accomplished people carry quietly through their lives, long after the world has decided it already knows who they are. Savannah Guthrie had everything: the career, the platform, the respect. And yet something was missing, not something abstract or philosophical, something real, someone real. And she was not going to stop until she found the answer. Long before the network contracts and the studio lights and the name that became shorthand for serious morning television, there was a girl growing up far from Hollywood. Far from any of the places where careers like hers are supposed to begin. She did not come from a family with industry connections. She did not grow up in a city where ambition was treated as currency. She grew up in a place where hard work was simply expected, where you did not wait for things to come to you, and where the distance between wanting something and earning something was a road you had to walk yourself. From the very beginning, there was something about her that did not fit neatly into the ordinary, a sharpness that showed up early, a curiosity that refused to stop at the surface of things. While others were satisfied with the simple answer, she wanted to understand the story underneath the story, the reason behind the reason, the human truth beneath the official version. That quality, restless and precise and impossible to switch off, would eventually carry her all the way to one of the most influential seats in American journalism. But it did not happen the way most people expect these stories to happen. She did not study broadcast journalism. She did not take the obvious path toward television. She studied law. She wanted to understand how truth was constructed, how arguments were built, how evidence was gathered and presented and challenged. She wanted to know how systems of finding truth actually worked from the inside. She passed the bar, she practiced. And then she made a decision that surprised the people around her. A pivot toward television that looked risky from the outside but felt to her like the most natural next step in the world. Starting at a local station, she learned the craft the hard way, long hours on stories no one else wanted, early mornings that blurred into late nights. The kind of grinding, invisible work that separates the people who genuinely want something from the people who simply like the idea of it. There was no shortcut. There was no famous name clearing the path ahead of her. There was only the work and her belief that if she kept doing it well enough for long enough, it would eventually speak for itself. What the cameras never captured during those years was the personal foundation being built alongside the professional one, a sense of self, a set of values that ran deeper than career ambition. A quiet but unshakable belief that the truth, however complicated it turned out to be, was always worth the effort of finding it. She could not have known then just how personally that belief would one day be tested, because the most important truth she would ever pursue would not be about a politician. It would not be about a corporation or a cover-up or a story assigned to her by an editor. It would be about her own life, her own history, her own name. And that pursuit was still years away, waiting patiently in the background of everything she was about to build. The moment Savannah Guthrie stepped into the national spotlight, something changed in the room. Not suddenly, not with fanfare. It was the kind of shift that is easier to recognize in hindsight than in the moment itself. A gradual brightening. A slow and growing awareness across the industry that this woman had something genuinely rare. A combination of qualities that the television world spends enormous amounts of time and money trying to manufacture and almost never succeeds. She could ask the hard question without turning the interview into a confrontation. She could challenge someone powerful without losing the viewer's trust in the process. She could be warm and precise at the same time, which sounds simple until you try it and realize it is one of the most difficult things a journalist can actually do. Networks noticed. And when she joined NBC News, it felt less like a hiring decision and more like an alignment. Like two things that were always meant to find each other finally had. Her legal background gave her a quality her peers often lacked: a structural precision, an ability to follow a thread through complicated material without losing the audience in the complexity. She covered presidential campaigns with the same controlled intensity a trial lawyer brings to a closing argument. She interviewed people whose decisions affected the lives of millions, and she did it without ever losing the human dimension of the conversation. Viewers felt it. Not just the professionalism, but the genuine investment underneath it. Savannah Guthrie did not appear to be performing interest, she appeared to actually have it. To actually care what happened next in the story. That quality, so rare and so impossible to fake, was what turned an accomplished journalist into something closer to a cultural institution. When she became co-host of the Today Show, the transition felt both unexpected and completely obvious. Morning television demands something different from the journalism that wins awards and breaks major news. It asks you to be present in the most intimate moments of a viewer's day. In their kitchens before the world has fully demanded their attention. In the quiet spaces between sleep and obligation. That requires a specific kind of accessibility, a warmth that is genuine rather than manufactured. Savannah had it, and she brought it every single morning without seeming to exhaust it. But beneath all of that, beneath the success and the warmth and the professional excellence, the investigative mind never went quiet. It simply shifted its attention. And at some point, without any public announcement, without any headline, it turned inward, toward a question that had been waiting for a long time, toward Nancy Guthrie. At the height of everything, Savannah Guthrie was one of the most watched journalists in the country. The numbers reflected it. The influence was real and measurable. When she spoke, people stopped what they were doing to listen. When she pressed through a polished non-answer with a follow-up that cut directly to the center of the issue, the clip would travel far beyond the morning broadcast. She had become the kind of media figure whose presence meant something, whose credibility had been built so carefully and maintained so consistently that it had stopped feeling like a professional achievement and started feeling like a fact about the world. She was a presence, fully formed, completely realized. Colleagues described her as someone who brought real preparation to every broadcast. Not the surface-level kind that checks boxes and satisfies producers, the kind that comes from genuinely caring about the subject. From understanding that the audience on the other side of the screen deserves more than a polished performance. They deserve someone who has actually done the work. Off camera, her personal life had grown into something equally full. A family, a home. A sense of grounded identity that she seemed to carry into every room she walked into, whether the cameras were rolling or not. And yet, even at the peak of all of it, even in the middle of everything that looked complete from the outside, there were dimensions to Savannah Guthrie's story that the public could not see. That no broadcast could capture, that no profile or interview ever fully addressed. The connection to Nancy Guthrie was one of them. To understand it, you have to understand something essential about who Savannah is as a person. She is not someone who makes peace with unanswered questions. It is simply not in her. The same instinct that made her exceptional at her job, that refusal to accept a story until it was actually complete. That lived just as powerfully in her personal life as it did in any studio or press conference. When something mattered to her, she went after it, with discipline, with focus, with the kind of patient determination that does not burn out and does not give up, and this mattered deeply. In a way that was different from anything in her professional life. The public was not aware of it, at least not at first. These things live in the private spaces that even the most visible people have a right to protect. But the search was real, the weight behind it was real. And the number attached to it, $100,000, was not symbolic, it was not theatrical, it was a declaration. A statement that said, without ambiguity, this matters enough that I am prepared to do whatever it takes to find the answer. That kind of declaration tells you everything about what the question meant to her. And the question, stripped down to its most essential form, was about identity. About the parts of a person's story that exist before memory begins, before choices are made, before anyone has the opportunity to shape their own narrative and decide who they are going to become. Some questions cannot be answered by achievement, cannot be quieted by recognition, cannot be resolved by any amount of professional success, no matter how genuine or how hard one. Who is Nancy Guthrie? And why did that name matter so much to the woman that morning America believed it already fully knew? Every life, if you look at it long enough and honestly enough, has a moment where the surface gives way. Not always dramatically, not always publicly. Sometimes it happens quietly, in the kind of moment that barely registers to anyone watching but reshapes everything for the person living it. For Savannah Guthrie, that moment was not a scandal or a controversy or a professional crisis. It was something far quieter, and in some ways far more significant than any of those things could have been. It was the acknowledgement that her story had a chapter she had not yet been able to read. The connection between Savannah Guthrie and Nancy Guthrie reaches into the kind of personal history that many people carry privately for years, sometimes for entire lifetimes. Before deciding to pursue it, questions about biological roots, about origins, about the parts of a family's story that get separated by circumstances, by difficult decisions made under difficult pressures, by the complicated and imperfect realities of human lives that do not unfold according to any plan. The willingness to pursue that story openly, to attach a number to the depth of that commitment, said something important, not just about what Savannah needed, but about where she was in her life. About what she had decided she was no longer willing to leave unresolved. There comes a point for many people when the questions that felt manageable in earlier years begin to feel more urgent. When building your own family makes you think harder about the family that came before. When the accumulation of professional achievement and public recognition somehow makes the private unanswered questions feel not smaller, but larger. Because now there is more life behind you. More context, more reason to want the full picture rather than the partial one. That turning point arrived for Savannah. And it changed the texture of her story in ways that were invisible to most of her audience, but that anyone looking closely could sense beneath the surface of everything she did and said. She was no longer just a journalist pursuing someone else's truth. She was a person in the middle of pursuing her own. And the $100,000 reward was not a headline strategy. It was not a publicity move. It was the honest, unambiguous expression of how much the answer meant to her. This was not a story she was covering. This was a story she was living. There is a particular kind of emotional complexity that comes with being someone whose entire professional identity is built around finding and telling truth. And then encountering a truth in your own life that resists easy discovery. A truth that does not cooperate with the tools you have spent decades sharpening. That kind of experience does not fit neatly into any narrative format. It does not resolve on schedule. It does not end when the broadcast ends. It is not a comfortable place to exist, but it is one of the most genuinely human places a person can find themselves. The viewers who tuned in every morning and felt like they knew Savannah Guthrie were right in the way that matters most. They were seeing something real. But they were not seeing the complete picture. And the search for Nancy Guthrie was, in the most essential sense, a search for that completeness. What came next would not just test her resources. It would test the emotional resilience that no broadcast career, no matter how demanding, can fully prepare a person for. Not every search ends with a clean answer. That is one of the things that makes this kind of story feel true in a way that most stories do not. It does not bend toward resolution simply because resolution would be satisfying. It follows its own shape, which is the shape of a real human life, and real human lives are rarely tidy. The search for Nancy Guthrie and everything it represented for Savannah opened into a larger and more complicated conversation about identity, about biological connection, about adoption and the emotional architecture it creates, the questions it leaves open, the longing it can quietly sustain across decades, and about the specific kind of courage it takes to pursue answers when you cannot be entirely certain you are ready for what those answers might turn out to be. Savannah Guthrie had spent a career placing herself across from people in their most exposed and vulnerable moments. She had asked the questions that others flinched away from. She had held space professionally and gracefully for truths that were difficult and complicated and resistant to easy framing. But this was different. This was her not as a journalist but as a person, sitting with her own unresolved question, carrying her own weight of not knowing. Searching for a piece of herself that no professional milestone had ever been able to provide, and no public recognition had ever been able to replace. The $100,000 reward in the end became a symbol in a story that was never really about money. It was about what the money communicated, a declaration of intent, a refusal to accept the incomplete version, a commitment to keep going even when the path forward was unclear and the destination uncertain. And in that refusal, in that quiet and unwavering persistence, Savannah showed something to the world that may have been more revealing than anything she had ever shown in front of a camera. She showed vulnerability, not the kind that gets performed for an audience, the real kind. The kind that lives beneath the composure and the credentials, and the years of carefully constructed professional presence. The kind that reminds you that even the people we look to for steadiness are carrying their own weight. That even the journalists whose entire working lives are devoted to uncovering truth can have truths of their own that remain, stubbornly and painfully, just out of reach. Whether the search ultimately led to the answers she was looking for, that belongs to her. It lives in the private spaces that even the most public figures are entitled to keep for themselves. The world does not need to own every part of every story. But what the search itself revealed, what it gave the rest of us permission to think about, is something that stays. It taught us that identity is not only what we build through our choices and our efforts and our achievements, it is also what we come from. And for some people, that origin is not a detail. It is not background information, it is the foundation. And without understanding it, something always feels unfinished, no matter how much has been built on top of it. Savannah Guthrie built something extraordinary, a career that will be remembered not just for its scale but for its integrity. A public presence that made millions of people feel, morning after morning, that someone serious and trustworthy, and genuinely human was paying attention to the world on their behalf. And then, quietly, away from the cameras, she went looking for the piece of her story that existed before any of that began. That kind of courage, the willingness to pursue your own truth with the same relentless honesty you bring to everyone else's, is perhaps the most meaningful thing a person can do. It is also, in its own quiet and unscripted way, the most cinematic. Savannah Guthrie's story is not really about television. It is not about morning show ratings or network contracts or the particular shine of a career that reached the very top of its field. It is about the questions we carry. The ones that do not get quieter with success. The ones that wait patiently through decades of achievement and recognition and the building of a full and meaningful life, and then one day make themselves impossible to ignore any longer. The $100,000 reward was never about the money, it was about how much the answer was worth. And for Savannah, it was worth everything, so I want to leave you with this. Do you believe that knowing where we come from shapes who we are capable of becoming, or do you think we write our own story entirely, independent of the chapter that came before us? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because in a story like this one, your perspective is not just welcome, it matters.